This is Wednesday at noon, and I'm Janet Fitch, and this must be Writing Wednesday. Getting in towards Christmas. Weather's finally turned cold, but still having fires here in California, so be safe out there. And consults in fiction first aid this time. It was interesting what people were having trouble with. There seems to be themes when I do fiction first aid, and for those who don't know, that's a monthly clinic through the community. With fiction first aid, so with Writing Wednesdays, if you can cut off your Wi-Fi, I'd appreciate it. We're back. I had to tell my hi, everybody. Yes, I had to tell my family members. Everybody has to turn off their Wi-Fi so we can have some strength. So thank you for staying with me. Hi, Alicia, Ruthie, Alden. Hi. All right, here we go. It is Writing Wednesday, and I'm Janet Fitch, and this is where I answer all your writing questions. Do my best anyway. And I was just saying that I had done my fiction first aid, which is a writing clinic through the community of writers. And the clinic, it's 15-minute consults, and it's really interesting the way questions, their themes to different days. Like this month, there were several questions about that turns out to be about character. Character, I don't care about my characters anymore. That's a real, that's something that happens. Hi, Linda. That's something that happens to writers, especially if you're writing a long form. You get sick of your characters. You lose contact with them. When you notice when they flatten out, when they become paper dolls. Hey, that's really boring. So what you need to do is reinflate or recontact your characters at a deeper level. What it means is that, you've used up what you know about them. And it's like chewing gum, eventually the flavor goes out. You have to contact them again. You have to learn more about them. So this is where the three-dimensional character study comes in, where you find out, what did they read? What was their favorite, what was their favorite subject in school? What did they do lousy at? What kind of religious background do they have? You ask, hi Jill, you ask yourself questions. So if you can keep that in mind, there is a wonderful three-dimensional character study in here that will give you like a format or formula. So the three-dimensional character study is physiology. Was your character sick as a child? Hey, back. So just hang in with me. I'm having, obviously, it's a bad day for my Wi-Fi. So, hi. So just stick in with me. If I freeze up, it looks like it's coming in and out. So it'll be back. So the idea is you reconnect with your characters by asking them questions about who they were, who are they physically, sociologically, and psychologically. So physically, a character who was sick a lot as a child is a different person than a character who was always in robust health or is in robust health at all times. Does the character have some kind of a physical problem? Do they have, visible scars, birthmarks, etc.? It makes a difference. So you ask questions about physiology. When did they, how are they, what is their constitution? Do they have good endurance? Do they have poor endurance? Physicality makes such a difference. Their level of vitality makes such a difference, especially in dialogue, how vigorous they are. There are all kinds of questions you can ask yourself. Sociology, what was their family of origin like? often we do that work, but we don't think to ask, what periodicals do they read? Are they, have they ever been involved with politics? What are their religious beliefs? Their associations, what do they do for fun? All that kind of stuff. There's a level, it's like going up to the next level of, multidimensional chess. You used up what you have on the third dimension, so now go up to the fourth dimension and ask more questions, things that you don't know about your character, their sociology, their psychology. Are they somebody, who, when they meet with adversity, do they back off? Do they come forward? Are they militant? Are they passive? Are they passive aggressive? What kind of a what are their superstitions, phobias, all that? Go through and make a list and ask her, see if you can answer other questions about them. Another thing that's really fun to do is to interview people who knew or know your character and get their take from their point of view. Talk to their daughter, talk to their mother in your mind, as an imaginative, creative person. Talk to other characters and have them tell you about your character. You can learn a lot more and get in better contact with them. So that helps tremendously for you to care again about your characters. One thing that this was my fiction first aid, which is a writing clinic through the community of writers that I just did, that there were certain questions that came up again and again. So this was one about, I don't care about the characters. The other one with this person's problem with her manuscript, you had two villains, two negative personalities who were both the protagonist, and one of them was more the protagonist, okay? But the one who was, even the one who was more a protagonist did not have the features of a protagonist, which is vulnerability, a mixed set of personality traits. So the inner conflict wasn't quite brought to the surface. It was there, but it was too deep. It was too backgroundy. And the thing about the protagonist that helps the writer tremendously is that the protagonist is slightly weaker than the antagonist. And the protagonist has a change, which the antagonist does not. So the antagonist is strong as hell because they're solid, they're static, that personality will act, but they're not going to have internal revelations. They don't think too much usually. So she needed to, there was vulnerability about her protagonist, but it was so deeply hidden that it was hidden from the reader and from the writer. The writer forgot about that. So if you bring that a little bit more to the foreground, in fiction it's really easy because they can say things that are very bold and sweeping, make these wonderful statements, but we also know what's going on in their head. So if there's weakness, self-doubt, doubt about the other, all that, we can do that as internal thought and then have this strength visibly to the other characters and visibly in the story. So these were some of the issues that came up during my session in Fiction First Aid. A common thing is people have been told that fiction, that a novel needs to start out with a bang, and the novel does not need to start out with a bang. A short story needs to start out with a bang. A short story is a 50-yard dash. A novel is a marathon. So you can, the purpose of the opening is to bring the reader in. You want to interest them. So starting with a bang, you don't have to start with bang, but you do have to bring the reader into the world of your character. We need to know who we are, where we are, and what's, kind of the situation just prior to whatever starts the action. So it's usually, and all of there are exceptions to everything, but in general, a good way of doing it is to let us see who the character is in their normal life, maybe a hint of what their problem is in their normal life, and then the phone call, and then the stranger, and then the change, then the crack in the facade. So it's like if you have a troubled marriage, you don't really want to start out with them yelling at each other. You might want to start out with a gentle, peaceful thing, and then the character might be thinking some sort of little difficulty with Clarence, and something happens, and I don't really want to tell Clarence about it. We're in a good place right now, which obviously already tells you that she and Clarence are not in a good place, right? So that is a problem. Always, we had a wrong point of view. The character, there was a novel where the character had the character was telling somebody else's story, a friend's story, and the friend would call, and guess what happened? It's like the protagonist is somebody to whom the action happens. The as told to, the person has to be incredibly involved in the story. They have to be, as involved as the people to whom it happens, like Nick Carraway. She said that her event, after 80 pages, that character becomes very important. The narrator, the point of view character. It's like 80 pages. You've already missed the boat. We have to know who is this about, and if it's about the friend, then you've picked the wrong protagonist. You need the protagonist. Usually the narrator is your protagonist, unless you have an authorial narrator, or you have somebody. If you have somebody who's providing a frame, they have to be actively the character to whom things happen. And it's not, I'm telling the story about a friend and then the friend runs to me, and it's rehashed stuff. Secondhand is not who you want. So think about your protagonist as your narrator. And then if you have another narrator, how lively are they? How involved are they? Is it just a frame? But usually the reader is asking, why are we learning about Heather when these things aren't happening to Heather? They're happening to somebody else. Unless the story is really about Heather's vicarious pleasure in their friends' escapades, and what's wrong with Heather is the story, then you just pick the wrong protagonist. And usually you run into problems later on, and you don't know why, and it's a wrong protagonist. And that happens. It does happen. Protagonist is the one to whom the action happens, so that it puts pressure on their characteristics, and you have a change gradually in terms of a novel. So we had that kind of character questions, being deeper inside of the character. The writing of people, it's hard for writers, and this was true of me when I started, to focus on your protagonist is more important than what happens. It's people read not to find out what happens, but to find out what the character thinks about what is happening. That's what's interesting about reading. And it's but when you're juggling a lot of plot stuff, sometimes you forget that the character's spin, the character's take on the action is what's important. So then that's another draft. You go through and make sure that everything is from the character's point of view. That's why your protagonist is so important, and seeing the world through the eyes of the protagonist. What else did we have? Fantasy. I had a manuscript, or a writer who was working on a fantasy manuscript, and the thing about fantasy, not so much sci-fi, but fantasy in particular, is that it is often couched in a really pretentious language. I think it originally, that language was originally minted by, in books like Beowulf, Hail, Hrothgar, son of Healfdene, But if you're right, I mean, that wasn't a novel, that was an epic that was recited. And these sort of hail, traveler, well met, phrasing, it was in a noble court and so on. But in fiction, in fantasy fiction, I gotta say, and it's a technique that I don't recommend because it's cruel and heartless, but my great writing teacher, Kate Braverman, used to, if you wrote something pretentious, often it was like, because we didn't have genre fiction, but often it was like writing a character from another culture and doing their dialogue. And if you did it wrong, if you weren't good at it, you weren't careful, you weren't subtle, you weren't attentive, and you did something cliche in the tone, she would repeat it in the broadest possible mockery. And I mean, you'd leave there in tears. Like if you wrote some Spanish inflected character, and you didn't do it well, you didn't really think about doing it in an interesting, unique way and thinking of the rhythm and phrasing and stuff. If you wrote the accent, she would read it like the Frito Bandito, and you would just leave in tears. But you never did it again. Never. So always imagine, if you're doing, especially fantasy, which has a tendency to be a little pretentious sometimes, imagine your worst enemy at a bar reading it out loud to their friends over drinks and having a good laugh. If you can mock it, you should think twice. So a lot of my session with this person was bringing it down a notch, bring it down a notch, Don't have a whole paragraph of that kind of dialogue. Just have a phrase. It's enough. A sentence is enough for somebody to be talking about this kind of, really elevated, regal, magical stuff. Be very careful. You want it to be thrilling without being mockable. So I spent my session with this person just bringing everything down a little bit, making things realistic. The more fantastic it is, and this is sci-fi too, the more fantastic it is, the more realistic it should be. The more, oh yeah, that could happen in another world, yeah. So you don't want to be so impressed with the verbiage of the genre. I urge people who are writing fantasy to watch a movie called Gentlemen Broncos, and just imagine you want to stay out of that classroom where this terrible writer is telling people how to create that pretentious language. You want to do exactly that in reverse. We have, let's say, Marla is asking about narrator versus protagonist. your narrator is generally your protagonist. There are works that work another way. I'm just saying that in a lot of cases, the as told to fiction doesn't work very well. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying think twice. And if you can make your point of view character your narrator, your protagonist equals narrator, you're going, a close third or a first person, you're going to do better than having a distant character who hears of a story and has to keep being told what's happening. If they weren't there, you're going to be in a lot of as told to secondary rehashed conversation. It doesn't, there are good ones, but think twice. Then there's, let's see, this one. What else did I find? Be careful having your character yawn. Getting up and yawning puts the reader to sleep. It alerts the reader to go ahead and yawn. That's not good. There was a question about agentry, and I always suggest the Poets and Writers complete book on being a writer. Has a whole chapter on agents and how to do that. Absolutely want to do that. Yeah, here was another one. It was it was not fantasy, it was set in a mythological past. And a character, it was voiced, so it's more like a monologue. Each character was going to have their monologue. But we're in a jungle and we're asking existential questions. What is man and what is reality and blah, 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 in a jungle. And it was all like, what is reality? But we never are in the jungle. We never see our dirty feet. We never see the snakes crawling down the trees. The thoughts are not connected to physical reality. So we talked about that thinking in fiction is spurred by something. We see something and it reminds us of something, and then we ask the question. So in feeling how people got to that question really helps us understand the question. I remember reading a book, not fiction, called I Am a Strange Loop by a guy, is a philosopher? Yeah, I think so. A philosopher named Douglas Hofstadter. I think he's a mathematician, maybe a philosopher. Anyway, I Am a Strange Loop. And it was like really dense, serious mental activity. And I did not have the background to follow the logic of what he was saying until I got to the center of the book, the central part of the book. I leaped ahead, where there was a story. And the story was about how his wife died after about 10 years of marriage, pretty young, with little kids, and how he came across this theory of being a strange loop, which is how you see things through your own eyes, but you also see them through the eyes of the people who are closest to you. So he would go to a movie and see a movie and see it through his own eyes, but he also knew how his wife would have processed it. So in a way, he part of him is his wife. That's his conjecture, that we are not as finite as all that we take on the characteristics and thoughts also of the people around us. So in a way, his wife isn't really dead because he's carrying around this holograph of her. So all kinds of ideas in this book. It was amazing. But until I got the story of how he began to think about this, I didn't understand the thought. And the same thing with deep, rich psychological insights in your stories. If I know what triggered it, then I understand it a lot better. People don't have ideas out of the blue. Something leads up to them. So that was something else we talked about in Fiction First Aid. So it was very useful. It was interesting. And I urge you the next time it's offered, to go ahead. There's a poem first aid at the end of this week. So if you write poetry, it's really fun. And they have really good people. Camille Dungy and Gregory Pardlow. We're talking about, National Book Award people. I mean, the writers are insanely good. So if you have poetry, this is the week. And I'm going to be teaching a class on the 22nd of January on the sentence. So a lot of people write, but there's they've only made it to the foothills. They haven't actually gotten to the Himalayas yet. And the sentence is sort of like the Himalayas, the peaks. So we're going to do some peak ascents. We're going to take a look at the really, how style is created in fiction. So that's a weekend of the 22nd of January, 22nd, 23rd, 24th. And signups are now, there's an early bird special, so communityofwriters.org. So I have questions for this week. And it's sort of like beginning, middle, and end questions. So this is very cool. The first question was, what makes someone a good writer? This is from Jens. Okay, what makes someone a good writer? Wow. I would say a clarity about issues, a interest in human beings psychologically and how they function, and subtlety in their thinking about human beings. An observant person is a good writer. Someone who's observant, sensitive, who keeps track of their thoughts, who writes it down rather than just having the fleeting thoughts. So they're sensitive, observant, curious about the world, about others and themselves, empathetic, able to be empathetic, which doesn't mean feel sorry for people. Empathetic means to be able to think your way into their experience. How would it be to be another person? And patient, it takes a while and people give up. I think these are the things that make someone a good writer. Anybody have comments on that? What do you think is a good writer? Yeah, I think the observation, empathy, ability to empathize with other people, which is a muscle. Ability to observe and make sure that you take notes and you can get back to those observations. A sense of language, a sense of the sentence, the rhythm of sentences, and the way we put words next to each other. Alicia says, willingness to share things unseen. That's right. Tenacity, absolutely. Thick skin helps. Yeah, but there are a lot of people who, does a good writer need a thick skin? The human being does, to be able to live with it, to evoke emotion with writing. That is absolutely true. And this is something that everybody needs to remember, is that to label an emotion is not to evoke emotion in the writing. When you say he was disappointed, it's just a label. You have to make us feel the disappointment by showing us how excited they were for whatever it was, and then just showing us the turn, how whatever happened didn't happen, and then we feel the disappointment. We don't label it. That is absolutely true. So here's another question. So what makes someone a good writer? Then there's, how do I just write? This is from Rick. How do I just write? I overthink everything And sometimes, even if I do write, I find it hard to revise it completely. Okay. So what makes a good writer, we've talked about that, which takes time. Alicia says show, not tell. It's sometimes you tell to get into the scene, to get from the end of one scene into another scene. You set it up, you'll be telling, and you'll tell the stuff that has no conflict. And then when you get into the conflict scene, then that is what you show. You don't have to show everything. You don't have to show them getting up and picking their nose and whatever. Only that conflict scene. Productivity tools, timer, writing, keep moving. Yeah, this is, okay, so how do I just write? I overthink everything, and sometimes even if I do write, I find it hard to revise completely. Okay, so this is the person who, there's the first level is how do I, write? And then this level is, this person is putting, you could say, which I will not say, but you could say, this person is putting too much effort, but that's not it. He feels unproductive. He is writing and thinking unproductively. Overthink everything, and even if I do write, hard to revise. So this is where people who say just write and don't edit, don't let the critical voice in until you finish a draft. That's where that advice is golden. The shitty first draft theory of writing will save this guy's life. Rick, if you're here on this call, it will save your life. Just write the draft without the editor, without criticizing yourself, without stopping, without going back. Sometimes you can turn off the light on your screen so you don't even see what you're writing, and just write and keep writing. Another thing that I do, and there's a wide variety of opinions about this, but what I do is I never think about my work unless I'm actually working. I mean, I do, of course, but I try. But I try not to. I try not to think about my work unless I'm sitting here at my computer. There is no point to it. Whatever I think of is going to be, whatever I think of independently of actually sitting here thinking and working at the same time is going to be useless. It's going to be absolutely useless. So better to use your time away from the computer, away from your writing, as a time to regenerate, to observe the world, to contact your fellow human beings, to clean your house, to do things involving sensual reality, and replenish yourself, do exercises, do other things. And I would recommend not thinking about your work when you're not working, because it won't necessarily have anything to do with the work. Although there are people who are like this, they get ideas in the shower or whatever. Any idea I get in the shower is going to be absolutely worthless. So I've learned not to do it. So that's a way not to overthink unless you're working. Even if I do find it hard to revise. Okay, so that's a different question. The first thing you do is you get it down on the page. You get the chapter, you get the draft, and then what? I find it hard to revise. So write it and get a bulk of work, especially if this is your problem. You don't want to get hung up on second guessing yourself. You want to just keep going as much as you possibly can. Then when it's time to revise, think about just a few questions rather than sentencing. Don't niggle the sentences. It's not as important at an early stage. It's more like the the big revision question when you reach the end of the draft is, excuse me, is what the heck is this about? That's the question. So you go, what the heck is this about? I've written about, there's so much stuff in this thing, and there's Harry and his family, and Shonda and her family, and what about the thing with Michael and David, and all the stuff. So you read it, and you go, what the heck is this about? Then you think about, how would you describe it to somebody at your uncle's Christmas party? Okay, here he is with the shrimp, and he's dropping the shrimp sauce, the cocktail sauce on himself, and he goes, yeah, you're writing a book, huh? What's it about? So you want to just really boil it down to, what the hell is it about? Okay, it's about a guy who is estranged from his brother and how it's affected them over the years. Da, 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 da. And what that does, when you go back through to edit, you realize, oh, this whole thing about Sissy and her porcelain dolphin collection has nothing to do with what the book's about. I guess you can cut that part. Unless you allow yourself to just go, what the heck was I doing here? What am I trying to do here? It gives you no guidelines to how to edit. Because what are you editing for? Your first edit, you've written your first messy draft, and just throw everything in. Throw everything in. Then you don't need all this second guessing. It takes a little more time because you're going to have to throw some stuff out, but it will stop impeding your creativity. So you're just throwing everything in, and that story, I love that story about Linda and her carrot cake that happened to me when I was a kid. I just think for some reason it seems to belong in here, so I throw it in, get to the end, what the heck is this about? Then I know the carrot cake story really does not belong. It doesn't belong in there. You just see what belongs in there. You read it through. You probably are going to rearrange some chapters. Maybe they don't come in the order that's the best storytelling. Maybe you can see by reading it, I need a chapter in here about how Donald got in there, with Sesame in the first place. Oh, yeah. So you just put a piece of paper and go, something here about Donald and Sesame. That's how you edit. So you don't try to write while you're editing. You just edit it, because your editor isn't going to write anything, So don't stop and moosh the editing and the writing together. First get that first edit. What belongs there? What doesn't belong there? How does it flow? And what does it need in terms of flow? Then you go back to the beginning. You're going to change the beginning because you didn't know what the ending was going to be. Oh, well, what I need something else to set this up. And often the beginning is the last thing that really goes into place. You might rewrite the ending again. The beginning again, Sometimes you get to the end of the first draft and you don't have the ending quite nailed down, and don't worry about that, because that's a next step up in the multi-dimensional chess. Beginning and ending, sharpening that. You'll be doing that to the end of your process. So then you kind of, now it's like you got the framing and the halfway done in the first draft. Then you're going back and you're putting in where the windows really should be, and you're making the structure more solid, pulling out stuff that just, that little add-on room, you're not going to get permitted for that, that goes. That extra bathroom, no, you can't afford this, you can't afford that, out it comes. And now you've got some kind of, sort of stable structure. Then you're going to go back and do the equivalent of the drywall. You're going to make sure those scenes are really going. You're going to write the new scenes that needed to be in there and aren't. You're going to change some of the intentions of scenes, because actually what you need is the opposite effect than you got there. Maybe they come in a great mood and jealous. Maybe you're going to need a scene where that scene needs to start jealous and end somewhere else. You don't, you'll start tuning the scenes that you have, adding things, taking things out. So the thing about it is you don't revise for everything all at once. You revise incrementally, probably from the larger things to the more technical or smaller things. And then usually the last revision is a language revision and just making it beautiful. The art of the sentence, You make the sentences beautiful. Make the word choice. Make sure it's just polished to a high shine. So Marla says, I know writers who can twirl words and gotten jobs, but when it comes to crafting a long story, they get lost. Crafting good sentences isn't enough when telling a story, no, but it is essential. And often it's the other way around, that people can tell a good solid story, but there's nothing interesting about their language. Usually poets, you see it the other way around, that they can craft those beautiful sentences, but there's nothing going, I shouldn't say there's nothing going on, but there's not a narrative. There's no urgency. There's no story there. So that's an interesting, it's not nothing that no one, it's like no single skill is enough. In fiction writing, you need all of the skills. Everything, you have to be firing on all 8 cylinders. So Alicia asks, what about unrealistic endings? Ugh. The ending of a book is really a tough one. The ending is like it's like the proof, like in geometry problem. It's the proof is the ending. How solid was that house? How much was it about what you thought it was about? Did you prove your theorem or not? The ending, and you will write the ending over and over and over, just like it's like making a bed and trying to get that sheet to lie flat. It'll take a while. You have to know what the book is about. You have to know how hard to hit that ending. Then there's a difference between the ending and the climax. The climax happens, and then the ending is where it all fits together. And the way I think of it is ringing the big gong at the end of the book. You bong, and then the reverberation reverberates all the way back through the book. So it kind of brings the book together. A good ending. So it takes a while, and you have to go on your gut when it's not enough. It's just wrong. It's too big, it's too small, it's too obvious, it's too subtle. You will go over and over and over and over again. But a bad ending for me tanks the book. I'm really fussy about the ending. If it doesn't end well, I feel the writer did not know what the story was. They have trouble. People who have multiple protagonist issues, have trouble ending their books. They don't know how to end, because you're not resolving anybody's issue, because you have too many people. You need a single protagonist to get the big gong. Yes, if you venture away from an ending that the readers would enjoy or find reasonable, you will tank the book for a number of readers, yeah. I mean, some people will forgive a bad ending or no ending, but in general, I feel like it's the proof of the mathematical equation. I'm not You know, it could be a beautiful equation, but if it doesn't prove itself in the ending, then I'm dissatisfied. Alicia says, I am the bad ending. You just have to keep on it. You have to ask yourself, what the heck was this about? What would give us a satisfying ending? And there's no rules about it. It's so personal. And you've developed over the years as you're working your craft, you develop a sensibility where you can recognize, usually, unfortunately, we can recognize what's not working. And you develop it by reading a lot. And you'll read a book that, wow, that was the correct ending. And then analyze it. Don't just go on to the next book. Why does this ending work so well? Apply a little bit of mental energy to that. Why is this working so? Why did that work so well? Or often a book that doesn't end well is easier to understand what didn't work. You can go back and you can go, oh, it didn't work because there's two protagonists. So how do you bring something like that to a satisfying ending? Or its issue was about the conflict between Sarah and Jane, and we're ending with Jane off skateboarding. It's like, so what? What is this? How does this ring the big gong? It's not going to. Let's see. And then Brenda had a question, very much, Brenda, I don't know if you're here, very much about endings. So this was perfectly timed. She writes, could you share your process when you think you've finished a story or a novel? Do you turn to what I've heard called beta readers, your first readers? Or do you share with a writer's group? How long do you wait until you reread? In other words, what are the steps in your editing or revision process before you send it to your agent? Okay. In terms of actual endings, I think I'm looking for the big gong. And when I don't feel that I've sounded the gong, then I keep working. It usually, for me, I want to complete the action of, whatever I'm struggling to prove, my geometry or algebra, my equation of the book. I want to conclude it. I want to leave with a sense of where a character has both finished something and something is opening up for the future. That's where I like to end it. That we've seen the change and that we've moved beyond. There's no way to go back. And there's a satisfaction. Like, how do you know you've eaten a good meal? It's like, I've eaten a good meal. It finished well. I had my coffee and brandy, and it lingers in my mouth. It lingers in my mind. It lingers in my sinuses. I'm a very physical writer. I feel it in my body. So to me, it's like that satisfying, beautiful meal that concludes. You don't want to be left. You had the meal, you had the turkey, you had the whatever, cordon bleu. And then your host goes, okay, done, bye. It's like, well, where's the dessert? Where's the coffee? Where's the drambuie? Where's that ending? You want that, to feel that you've really had the complete meal. So how do I know I'm done? When I usually, I've been working on a project a long time, when I find myself making changes that are no better than what it was before, different but no better, then I know I can pretty much figure that I'm done. When you're making changes for the difference, like you rake the coals this way, you rake the gravel, this way, you rake it this way, you rake it this way. It's still this, basically, it's no better than it was. It's just different. Just stop, because people can go on and on changing their book. I've seen people, oh, I love you writers, I love you so much, but when I see you just changing your book year after year after year, and it's still 20 years and you're still working on the same book, I just feel like I want to have an intervention. When you've changed it for the different, but it's no better to change it back to the way it was and call it a day. Okay. Beta readers, yes. Now, I do work with a writers group, so they have seen everything. So they're not fresh. By the time I've worked on a book for 4 or 5 years, my writers group has seen every bit of it in various drafts of it. They're not clean readers. So beta reader is a clean reader, hasn't seen it before, doesn't know what's going to happen. So I always have at least 1 or 2 early readers who read it after my writers group, and my poor husband, I often make him read it too as I go. He's a writer and he's very good, and I abuse the privilege. But I do have clean readers then who have never seen it before, and I go, here, check this out. And I'm very clear about, right in the margins, where you're bored, where you like it, where you're excited, where you're bored, and where you put it down for the night, or where you put it down to go get a sandwich. Wherever you put it down, note that. So it gives me a sense of the reader's experience of reading the book. And then I get some sense, bored. You have to get people who are honest and will write kind of boring here. This is slow. It hurts your feelings, but so what? It's really valuable to have that information of where they're bored. So they don't need to be writers. Often they're not. They're just, you have friends who are good readers, and that's a good first reader. So 2 or 3 of those, really helpful. How long do you wait until you reread it? I am probably the most impatient person in the world, and this is somebody who, I'm a slow writer. It could take me 5 years, 4 years to write a book, but I'm really impatient. So if I've finished the book, I'm not going to stick it in a drawer for 6 months, as I should. I'm going to probably, what happens is you've reread it so very many times by the time you feel you're done, that it's difficult to reread it at all. To reread it, I generally put in a different typeface. I put it in a format like a page, so single space, different typeface, laid out like a page of manuscript, to reread it and pretend it's a book. And then you'll find when it's in galleys, you'll reread and just hate everything you see. So that's part of it too. So those are my steps in editing a revision to send it to my agent. I will probably have 4 complete drafts, each draft representing, hundreds of hours of writing and then going back and writing and going back, but complete drafts. First draft is the what the hell is this about draft. Second draft, rearranging the studs, getting rid of that extra bathroom, all that. Third draft is, heightening the conflict, getting the colors and the smells and the richness of the world, in there. Fourth draft is a polish. so language draft. What else? Leslie says, I often write scenes sporadically with great excitement and vigor as they come to me. What's the method of putting these together? How do I link the moments? Okay, this is the way I wrote White Oleander, is whenever I could see something, a scene from anywhere in the book, I would write that scene, throw it in a box. Any other scene I could see really clearly, I'd write that scene, throw it in a box. Maybe there would be a sequence of scenes that I could see the whole, that whole like foster home. Usually not, but sometimes a scene, a chapter, throw it in a box. Then when the box was full, I drilled, 3-hole punch into those pages and put them in a notebook, and then saw the flow. Oh, this home first, something here, just a piece of paper just going, something here needs a group home, needs a this, needs, a nighttime scene, whatever, just a piece of paper. And then I had things left over that just didn't fit anywhere. I try it here, and wherever it was, it would just stop the narrative. So out it went. And then I went through it again and wrote those extra scenes. And then I had an actual narrative draft. So that's exactly what I would do. Leslie and Alicia summarized it. Very good. Okay, Megan says, how do you get over the hating everything you see part? Okay, so for me, that is galleys. And galleys are what the publisher sends you before they start building the book. So at that point, it's terrifying because you have to make the changes you can, and you can't change the length of the page. You can't. If you add another line, you've pushed the type down, you've changed the count of the whole, at least the whole chapter. If you have a space, then it goes to a new chapter head. But my Russian books are, because they're big books, I didn't want there to be big white blank pages adding to the page count. So it's one of those things where it comes down the page and then there's a new chapter title and then it continues. If I change the line count on any one page, it changes the whole book, the length of the book. Okay? And you cannot do that in galleys. You can take out, it has to count. There's a fixed count. You're not supposed to change large chunks at that point. So what I have to remember at that point is that I've been through this before, and I just know it's part of the process now. That I get to the point when I finally see it said in type, I'm going to see everything that's wrong with it. And I'm going to forget everything that's right with it. You forget mainly how much energy you put into every sentence, how much energy is condensed into every sentence, that when the reader reads it, these are going to explode in their minds. You see it and you just go, oh my God, it's just a bunch of words. Forgetting the how much work and how much thought, how much power you've packed into each sentence. So that's where I hate it, but I have the experience now that I know that there's more there than I'm seeing. It's not just a bunch of words, that there's been a lot of work, a lot of good work that goes into that. So anyway, thank you. Well, I work at every book that way. Leslie says you've put a lot, every single sentence, lot put into every sentence. And that's the way I write. So every book that I've written is written that way, because I feel that the reader, deserves that experience. I mean, they're giving you their time. They're giving you a piece of their life. They're opening their minds to you. They're opening their hearts to you. And I want to give them a big experience. I'm a very emotional writer. I want to give them a big emotional and aesthetic experience so that it's beautiful. There's not enough beauty in the world. You know, we create beauty. We can create that and give that to somebody to make them feel more alive, you know. And, you know, books enrich us if they're written like that. So this was I satisfied with the movie? I've had two movies, White Oleander and Paint It Black, were both made into movies. And I'm always happy with the movie. You know, I shouldn't say always happy. I have been happy with both films in different and wonderful ways. But it's not my work, so it's just gravy. It's like, yeah, it's gravy. You know, it's like if you're in a band and some other band wants to cover your song. You know, it's like, yeah, cool. Isn't that interesting? That's awesome. Yeah, I've liked both of the movies. They've been fantastic. So anyway, if there's any other questions, they are taking still there's space in my Art of the Sentence class at thecommunityofwriters.org. It's January 22nd to 24th, so if you're interested in playing with sentences with me and seeing how writers make style, that's going to be super fun. And if there are no more questions, we will see you next week for Writing Wednesday. Thanks for joining me. Okay, bye.